All right, welcome everybody. Give everybody just a second to hop on. Welcome to week 2. I'm going to introduce ourselves and I'm going to get my screen shared. Always that moment where I hold my breath and hope that screen sharing still works the same way that it did the last time I did this, which was this morning. You think it would be the same, but it's not. Okay.
That's part 1.
That is part 1, which should be skipped. How fun is that?
It's a review of part 1.
Yeah, but I skipped those slides, did I not?
It looks like it, yeah.
Yeah, oh no, they're skipped. There we go. We'll just start here. Fun times. All right, welcome everybody. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to week 2, student privacy and digital citizenship, where we are defining what it means to protect students' privacy. My name is Amanda Taylor, and my guest today is Kevin Fairchild. So to reintroduce myself again from last week, this is actually a shirt from Saddleback. You recognize that, Kevin?
Yes.
Yep. So my name is Amanda Taylor. I work for Design for Learning. I also work on a large iPad implementation project with the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. I've been teaching and education since 2005, former high school teacher, former ed tech teacher on special assignment. I used to work for Kevin Fairchild, our guest today. And I'm excited to share some of these things with you and hope they help you become a better teacher. And my guest today, Kevin Fairchild, Instructional Design and Technology Coordinator for Saddleback Valley Unified, and one of my favorite people in the whole world.
Thank you. I've been in Saddleback for about 6 years now. Formerly used to be called Educational Technology Coordinator, but we really do a whole lot more with instructional design these days than we do with actual technology. I'm a former high school science teacher and also a former TOSA for instructional technology, and was taught for about 16 years at the high school level. So I'm happy to be here.
Nice, awesome. I like to say your job at the district is really the marriage between like the business technology side and the instructional side.
That's marriage might be too strong of a word. Bridge is maybe
bridge. There you go.
This position and the team that works with me, we were originally in the technology department, and a few years ago moved to the educational services department. So we fit well either way. I go to meetings in both departments, so that's fun. But yeah, it really is kind of the liaison, the bridge between technology and education. And as you've seen in my bio, I'm a former teacher. I'm not a tech guy. So they start talking about servers and domain controllers and this and that. I'm like, just barely follow along. But when it comes to instructional use of the materials, then I feel like that's where my strength is.
Yeah. And I think the two of those coming together and them understanding from a business, technology, corporate side, understanding what teachers need and actually use things for is so valuable, because I'm sure if you work at a district where you have to submit a help desk ticket, if you need help, there's a frustration on your end where you're just like, I just want the buttons to work. I just want the printer to work. I just want the Wi-Fi's to work, whatever it is. And, they've got frustration on their end because they're like, well, why can't the teacher just do X, Y, Z? I'm like, because they can't, because they have children in their room, like 30 of them. Yeah. So.
And directly related to our topic today, the very common help ticket is, hey, I want to use this app, come install it for me. And then sometimes in this department, we have to be the ones to say, I'm sorry, you can't use that with your kids. And here's why. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today.
And it seems that that's happening more and more as we progress. And as things, new things come out or new laws are written, things that maybe were available. For example, when I first started teaching, nobody told us about YouTube in the classroom. Like nobody said we couldn't watch it. Or I remember when we first started watching Netflix in the classroom, or you would rent a video and bring it in, and all of those things that you could kind of get away with. But now when you're connected and you have this Wi-Fi that's, can block certain things, like, but it worked last year. Like, well, last year we were breaking the rules and this year we're not. And that can be tough too.
And
Yeah.
and I think also the fact that we went on emergency onset distance learning in March of
Yeah.
2020, and we're trying to figure out an entire brand new world, and took some shortcuts because we had to.
Yeah.
And now we're kind of, as we come out of that, hopefully for good, that we will, we've got to pay more attention to what we do, because we're not in the immediate emergency situation that we were 18 months ago to 2 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I know it ramped up a lot of our capacity, it ramped up a lot of our skills, and where we were just trying so hard to get devices in classrooms. Well, we solved a lot of those problems, but it's never, the problems are never forever solved. There's always something new. There's always something coming up. So in this series last week, we talked about defining digital citizenship and kind of what the core is, that it's more than just knowing your password and not sharing it. It's about creating a classroom culture. This week, we're going to talk about student privacy, which is really, really important legally for you, especially as an educator, for the district and the administrators above you. There's a lot happening above. Like what I like to say, this is above my pay grade. There's a lot happening above your pay grade, which is great. You don't have to worry about all of those things up there, but there is things that you can be aware of and know about to make sure that you're being in compliance, and that you're not putting any student data at risk. And then next week, we're talking about actual classroom application and examples. So I'm going to start with this thought: to be true digital citizens, our students need teachers who model pro-social, creative, and responsible social media use. This makes me laugh when I think about the teacher that I worked with, that was not always, and I say this with the most grace and understanding, was not honoring like plagiarism and copyright laws when she was borrowing other content, either from textbooks or workbooks, things that she shouldn't have been copying, but then would get upset with students when they would do something similar in their work, plagiarizing or whatever. And I realized that it's gotten a lot more nuanced and a lot more specific, especially in the digital world. But we get to be models to students in how data should be handled and how we treat the devices, all of those things. We get to be that model for them, whether we like it or not. Kevin, do you still have teachers that store their passwords underneath their keyboards?
Oh God, I hope not, but probably. Probably, yeah.
I remember when we were a big thing with privacy, like on the most simplest level, right, is passwords, making sure that you're not sharing your passwords. And I remember when I worked at Saddleback, we had a teacher that shared her Wi-Fi password with a student, and like a little game of telephone, all of a sudden that same password was being used by students across the district, across all the high schools. And so when they looked to see like how many places, how many machines is this person logged in at, it was like some astronomical number.
Yeah.
And at a basic level, the teacher's like, well, I just want them to have the Wi-Fi access that they need so they can do this or do that. What she didn't realize that they were sharing, she was also sharing, was access to gradebook information. How many other things did she open up unintentionally by sharing that one password? So many things, right?
Password and security education for our teachers and our staff is one of the biggest issues that we have. I mean, we get hit by hacking attacks, but more likely we get so many phishing emails where they're asking for teachers' passwords. And so we've had to do a lot of education around Here's ways to protect your passwords. Here's things to look for in emails. We've done a lot of that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's tough. And I think we also, I learned this working with you as well. Sometimes when there are rules or policies in place and they don't necessarily make sense to you, or you don't understand how they're applicable or where they come from, we had this saying that we would tell teachers, well, this one time, this one teacher did this one thing, and that's why that rule's there. And maybe it was 5 years ago, but because that happened, all of these protections had to be in place. And now here we are. Maybe we can undo that rule. I don't know. But for right now, that's why it's in place. So I may not know the origin, but I know that this one time, this one teacher did this one thing. And now here we are. So not able to download our own extensions or whatever. So, all right. So let's define. And if you guys have questions specifically about student privacy as we're going through, please make sure you put them in the chat and we will talk about them. So defining student privacy, this is one of those things where I want to know enough to not get in trouble, but like just knowing all of the like details and the super specific things and the codes and the lines, like it just makes my brain hurt. So I really want to simplify this for y'all because I really like it being simplified for me. Basically, your students are minors. And so their data needs to be highly protected and monitored. And we want to make sure that they have all of the freedoms and abilities to learn and use the tools that they want to learn, and use the tools that they need to be knowledge seekers and scholars and all of that. But that all of these companies that we're utilizing use that information for things. And so those third parties have to have permission or have to follow certain rules and mandates to have access to that student information. And so either the method in which they're utilizing, working with your student has to change. There's a lot. So we're gonna break this down and make it really simple. But basically, your students' attendance records, their grades, their discipline records, and their health records are what's kind of at stake there. All of those things need to be kept private and not available to outside people. I actually have an example, but I'm going to keep it to myself because I think it's going to come out in just a minute. Anything you want to add to this slide, Kevin?
Well, I think it's the third parties box on there that is kind of the new entry in the last maybe 10 years, because I think you may decide to use a particular app in a classroom. Let's use WeVideo or Seesaw or whatever, and I'm not picking on either of those, but that's something that's conscious. We know we're using that, but what district level people have to look at is what third-party services are they using and what kinds of data are they sharing with their third partners. Call them fourth partners if you like. So yeah, it's all of that kind of things and that's invisible to students and teachers most of the time. So those are the kinds of things that the district office people have to look at and worry about.
That makes a lot of sense. I didn't even think about their third parties, because they have third parties and those third parties may have third parties, and it keeps going from there.
Sure.
And we're going to get to metadata here in just a second. All right, so why does this matter? Because advertising profiles are set up as soon as you touch the internet space. Part of that is metadata, but we don't want your students to have an online persona until they're old enough to have one, is a big thing. So decreasing the exposure to data, and this also goes with things at home too. I set up accounts for my children when they were younger, and I just put in a fake birthday because I didn't want to have to mess with the whole like under 18 thing. At the time it was under 18. Well, they used those accounts. They finally started using them during the pandemic, and they didn't use those accounts for more than a year. And there must have been something in the programming where Google sent them like a notice. They were like, hey, we noticed that you're not as old as you say you are. And so we're going to cut you off. And so I don't know what they did. I don't know if they put in their age somewhere, like they're just being honest little kids, or if it was their YouTube history. I don't know what it was. That they were like, you're obviously a minor, you can't have access to these things. And so we had to put on all the parental controls and stuff. So all of that is being accessed from them at any given time. So this is the big why. If something is free, you're the product. And so when you're thinking about using tools, using websites, and it's free, or it's even freemium, which is a big word, that company has to make their money somehow, unless it's a nonprofit, like Common Sense Media or PBS. They're getting their money from somewhere, and it's often by selling data, selling algorithms, selling patterns. They want to know, they're building personas so they can sell items better to you, which is crazy. Somebody was explaining metadata to me, and I think that's my next slide. Yes, PII and metadata. So I want to break these two things down because my husband talks about PII all the time, and the whole, like when GDPR was a thing, and that was like a 4-letter word in our house for a while. I know we even struggled with it, not necessarily because GDPR was an issue in the school district, but because there was a trickle-down effect, right, with that in place. So PII is personal identifiable information, right?
PII can be either indirect or directly identifiable information. Any kind of data that a company or an organization or a person could use to identify a student. So that would include the name, that would include their student ID, that would include their birth date. It would certainly include a picture. It may include parents and siblings' names. Anything that you could possibly use to either directly or indirectly identify a student, that's called PII, personally identifiable information. And the reason that that's important is because that's going to come up, and it's heavily restricted in the laws that we're going to go over in just a couple of minutes, and the protections that students do have in schools.
And different schools, and we're going to talk more about this, but different schools protect PII in different ways. You see different, like, well, this is why we do it this way. Like one example is I have some schools that don't use first or last names in any form in student email addresses. It's a random number, which is really hard for kids to learn. And that can be challenging.
Well, a very simple example of this is years ago, I did this before we had kind of electronic grade books that were accessible through the web. You'd post a printout of grades in the classroom, usually with ID numbers, not names, usually. Well, that's not allowed anymore under these laws, because that is technically releasing personally identifiable information, both the ID number and the grades, to unauthorized people, right? If one kid gets to see other kids' grades, that's not acceptable. So in our district, we don't do that anymore. And most districts, I think, don't. And that's a very, very simple example of what it could mean to release personally identifiable information. We had another one where a couple of years ago, actually 4 or 5 years ago here, a volunteer at one of the school sites accidentally copied a list of student names and IDs and sent it out to the PTA mailing list. Didn't mean to. It was an accident, it was an oversight. But then we had to go clean all that up by changing like 100 students' ID numbers and sending out information to parents and students and everything. So it can be something as large as that, or as small as posting things in the classroom.
So even though we've changed, because it used to be your social security number, they stopped that about halfway through college, where they stopped using your social security number as your like ID number. And so that was safe. And now not even your ID number is safe, because your ID numbers can still be entered into a system and directly connected to you. Okay, that makes sense. And then metadata. Can you help us break down metadata?
So metadata is data about data. If I go on to Google and I search for cat pictures, the actual pictures that I get, that's the data. The data is what I got. The metadata is what I searched for, when I searched for it, what computer I did it from, what kind of software I was running, those kind of things. So it's the data about the data. And you would think that that's not a huge deal. You would think, well, whatever. But in fact, large amounts of that data can be correlated together to have a very, very good picture. For example, if someone finds that I've searched for cat pictures and then I've searched for a humane shelter, and then I've searched for where's the nearest pet food store, they can get a guess of what I'm doing that afternoon. They don't have to know any of the data. They can take a pretty good guess. And that's exactly what these algorithms do. It's not an individual who's sitting down and looking at the stuff. It's algorithms that are all putting that together and then taking the picture of, people who search for this often search for this, and then, making some conclusions, accurate or not, about what I've been up to without seeing anything about the data itself. So metadata is data about the data.
And it's almost like behavioral observations. Like there's a lot of psychology behind metadata and how people get that information. So this is part of why if you go to a friend's house and you're talking about a product, something that they like that maybe you don't necessarily like, and then you come home and all of a sudden that product is on your social feed. It's not because your phone is listening to you, right? It's because there's a lot of tracking involved. That's what somebody told me, that it's not that your phone is listening to you, although your phone may be listening to you. I don't know. I don't think it is. But a lot of it has to do with your location, because it's tracking where you're going. And now your metadata is close to somebody else's metadata. And that triggers like, oh, you are around somebody that uses this kind of toothpaste. And now that toothpaste is showing up as an ad on your feed. That's
So
part of that makes my mind explode. And part of that's like, make it so much easier for me to shop. I'm really not mad about it.
So
right?
we're all of this seems very dystopian, and in a lot of ways it is. But the next slide is going to make us all feel a lot better, I hope, because
Yes.
what the examples we've been giving so far have been about kind of everyday life, just being in public. The good news is that schools, and particularly kids in school, have a lot of layers of protection. And that's what we're really focusing on now, is how do we protect the kids from this kind of surveillance and data collection.
Got it. So we've got government who designs and puts these policies into effect. It's a lot of the alphabet soup that you've heard of before. And we're going to go over 3 very specific ones. We don't have a lot of control. I mean, I guess you do with who you vote for, and talking to your representatives and making it known how you feel or what you do know. But those things are enacted, and then your district, they get to do a lot of the heavy lifting, right? So they're putting in these mega filters, all of the things that are required for certain funding to come in. They're supposed to be providing training for educators. At the beginning of the year, every school has a series of trainings that all teachers have to be part of. What does Saddleback do for digital citizenship and like that kind of training?
Well, we do have, we use, like a lot of schools, we use the common sense media lessons. We have written what we're calling wrappers. They're kind of wraparounds for the lessons that are focused on our own curriculum and our own situation here in Saddleback. So we've spent the last 2 or 3 years kind of revising all of that, which is great. The district level kind of has 2 almost contradictory roles that are in conflict a lot. The primary purpose of a technology services department in a school district is to provide the technology that teachers, students, and staff need. At the same time, their job is to protect from outside attacks or to make sure that everything is done within the confines of the law. And so when we get requests from teachers or principals or students that say, hey, I want to use this, the technology services wants to be able to provide that, but sometimes literally can't for legal reasons or policy reasons or financial reasons. So there's that conflict between our job is to provide things for kids and for teachers, and yet our job is also to protect them and make sure that we're complying with everything that exists.
Yeah. And sometimes things change and what was available is now no longer available, or you have to find a new way to make that thing that was available now safe because of things changing. School is another layer. Your school should have maybe, I hesitate to use the word discipline, but there should be some sort of school-based, behavior management for, what happens when rules and things are violated. You can't run that in your classroom alone. So you've got that you've got that layer there. They also, the school is a lot of times where the communication to the families comes from. Principals explaining, they get the information from the district and then they provide it out to the parents and the families. And then they also are another layer of monitoring. I know anytime a student, I think it's still this way in your district, if something gets searched and they're not supposed to be on that website or whatever, not only does the district get notified, but the principal gets notified as well.
Yes, school districts are required by one of the statutes that we're going to see to provide internet filtering. And we are also required to report to principals, administrators, if students are searching for certain categories. So we highlight in our searches, if students search for violence, terms related to violence, weapons, or drugs, that gets reported to the site administration, and they can follow up and decide what, if anything, they're going to do. Obviously there's false positives there.
Right.
Every year you search for To Kill a Mockingbird and that violence comes up. So, okay, all right. But, you do the best you can with the filters that you have. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then the classroom is also important. Not everything is above our pay grade as classroom teachers. We get to create the classroom management and culture that our students, we get to model for them. We get to select the apps and tools that we use that are within our school and district policy and availability. And most importantly, and kind of why we're here, is we get to protect student data because you have so much student data at your fingertips. And it is so, so, so important that you're protecting that information.
And
all right.
As the example I gave earlier of the volunteer in the office, it can also happen with teachers. It's very frighteningly easy to send the wrong information in an email to thousands of people. It's just so easy. We've all made mistakes in sending emails, and so that's just something that we have to be very, very careful about. The piece about app and tool selections and what websites you're going to send the kids to, every district is different in how much latitude they give to individual teachers and the school sites. In Saddleback here, we are we're very kind of lax. We allow schools to purchase subscriptions to things that are not district-wide. We allow teachers to find their own websites and use tools that we haven't necessarily said, yes, absolutely it's there. So we don't have a lockdown system for us. But one of the things that it's important if you're going to do that is to really look at the terms of service for the particular system. we had, for example, we had some middle school music teachers earlier this year who wanted to use a particular site, and it would look like a great site, except it was for commercial musicians. It was not intended for students. The terms of service specifically said no one under 18 can use this site. Now, the same site had an educational version, and we were able to find that, and that one had the terms of service that said, yes, we can have anyone from 13 to 18, and then with below 13 with parent permission. So those kinds of terms of service, we were able, by looking at that, we were able to kind of keep those teachers out of trouble and make sure that they're using the educational version of the site, not just the professional version. And so those are the kind of things that you really want to look for when you are selecting the tools. Is what you're looking for: privacy, how do they handle the data? You're looking for what's ages in the terms of service. You're looking for where is the data stored. You're looking for are they providing ads? Are they taking the data and sending it to advertisers? So those are the kinds of things that you need to search for, and your district, excuse me, or your school will be able to kind of give you some guidance on that as well.
So where would I find that? I almost want to just open up. I'm going to go to Seesaw because that's a website that I use often, or an app that I use often. So web.seesaw.me.
So I'm going to give you tricks of the trade for technology services here. Okay. And this is just between us. This is a secret. Don't let this get out. Okay.
Okay.
What I do is I Google Seesaw terms of service.
Let me Google that for you. Seesaw
right.
terms of service. Look at that.
Right.
It comes right up. I don't even have to search the web. In my head, I'm like, okay, go to the website, find it. And there's also privacy policy. So looking at those things. Yeah. And part
of the requirements of the laws that we're about to talk about are that all of these sites have to post terms of service. They have to post the privacy policy. There's certain things that have to be in there, and they have to have that. So if you find a site that just doesn't have one, run far away.
Yeah. And I think if you run across something and you're like, well, this site says we have to have, consent, or we have to do this, and you don't know if maybe the school has, and you just didn't realize that was one of the things that the family signed. Yeah. Don't be afraid to ask those questions, because that's important. And you will every once in a while have a parent that will want to know, that will have those questions for you. So let's talk a little bit about what those, what governs what those terms of service say. Alphabet soup, FERPA, COPA,
and SOPIPA.
And SOPIPA.
I don't know. FERPA, I think that's how it's pronounced. I don't know.
I don't know. It's the California one.
Right.
So the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, and Student Online Personal Information Protection Act. So these are the main ones. And there's different things. If you live in the UK, it's GDPR, or if you live in Europe, rather, there's different things across. Your state may have something specific to your state. The Student Online Personal Information Protection Act is specific to California, because that's where we are both located. So you may look and see, like, what state does my state have, stuff for that. So that's good to know.
It's California specific, but most states have something like it.
Yeah.
So FERPA, and the first two that we're going to talk about are federal US laws. FERPA is probably the one that you may have heard about. Basically what it does is it restricts what educational institutions can do with student data. And it requires educational institutions to protect student data. And this is where all of this comes from, really. This is where this was kind of the granddaddy of them all. This is where they all came from. So essentially, parents and guardians have certain rights about their children until they turn 18 or graduate high school. Upon graduation of high school or turning 18 and becoming an emancipated minor, the rights revert to the student themselves. But what that means is that anything that the student, that the institution or the school or the district is going to send out to anybody, other schools, colleges, not usually the state. The state's usually, for like state testing purposes and all that, the state's usually exempted themselves. That has to be approved, that has to be consented by either the parent, guardian, or by the student themselves. So this is where, this is where kind of that real base level of your data is yours and schools can't just do what they want with it. For certain things, medical things, some special education things, HIPAA will also apply. HIPAA is the Health Insurance Privacy Protection Act or something like that. That's probably not right, but it also applies for certain situations. But most things in education are covered under FERPA. There is also another one. That's COPA or COPPA. I don't know how you want to say it, whatever you feel.
I think most people say COPA.
COPA, I think so, because COPPA sounds vaguely, not cool.
COPA sounds better. It sounds like Copacabana.
Yeah, that's right. There we go. Now I'm going to have that song in my head. Don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So COPA is the one that puts requirements on under 13s. So this is where all of the ones, if you look at terms of service for different sites, some of them will say, only over 13s, or they'll say 13 and below have to get parental permission. And this is where this comes from, is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. It requires parental consent for collection of any personally identifiable information for children under 13. It puts requirements. I mentioned that all the different vendors and all of the websites have to have their privacy policy. They have to have their terms of service. That's because of COPA. That's the requirement there. The websites and any online services have to protect the privacy. This is not specifically an educational act. This is aimed at any game that is aimed at kids. This is anything, but obviously because schools have a lot of kids in them, it applies to us a lot. Now, for the consent, that can be broadly interpreted. A lot of school districts and schools will capture that consent in one big thing at the beginning of the year. So when the parents are going through either registration, maybe data confirmation, or there's some kind of annual notification that they have to get and then return, show that they've signed it, that probably includes some kind of consent that we're consenting to our kids being able to use these services within school boundaries for educational purposes, with reasonable restraints. So that doesn't mean that every time you want to use a different website, you have to send out permission slips to every parent, because you probably got it already. You probably already have it just by the sheer fact of the kid being in the school and having a parent that signed a form at the beginning of the year. In our district annual notification of parents, we revise it every year. We list the websites that we provide. Teachers or schools have had other ones, then obviously we don't know about that. But then we also we leave it open. We say, you're consenting to these sites among others. So we write it intentionally vaguely. But one of the things that we do and is we rely a lot on studentprivacypledge.org. And if you look up studentprivacypledge.org, it's a nonprofit. It's an informal organization that is basically just trying to get all educational vendors to agree to a common way of handling student data. So when I'm looking at a service When I'm looking at a website, when I'm looking at some kind of company and I see that they've signed the student privacy pledge, I automatically feel 100% better, because that means they're paying attention. They know
Yeah.
what they're supposed to do, and they know what they're not going to do. Now, obviously, it's a self-report. They could violate it, but I'm trusting them not to. So, yeah.
Right. I mean, this was a big step when this came out a couple of years ago. So I think they have, it's that power responsibility combo. They want to provide services. They know that their services are helpful and making a difference in the classroom. But that also comes with a lot of really sensitive information. So, all right. And then our last one is the Student Online Personal Information Protection Act.
And this is the one that is a specific California law that requires that companies not collect data or metadata from K-12 students in education for the purposes of advertising. It's very specific that is not allowed. Now, again, anyone who's done that signed the student privacy pledge, they're already not doing that. It was a big deal many years ago. It was a big deal when our district adopted Google Apps, now called Google Workspace, because people had heard that Google collects information from you whenever you use Gmail or any of their services. And that's absolutely true in non-education spaces. If you're using it in business, if you're using personal, absolutely they do. But Google does not collect information from educational domains. So if a school district or a school sets up Google Apps for their institution, Google Apps for Education does not collect any data, and it doesn't serve any advertisements to kids. So that's, again, I only have Google's word for that, but there's a lot of consequences if they were to not be doing that. So I think that's pretty reliable.
Yeah. And I imagine that things will change and shift, and new acts and policies will be put in place as technology changes. As things get, more complex, so will the protections, and hopefully they can keep up. Because it feels like some of these, I don't know when these got enacted, but we've been online at school since the late 90s. And I don't know if they had half of this stuff back then.
Yeah, most of these were late 90s, early 2000s.
Okay.
I think the next kind of frontier is facial recognition and video surveillance. It's used in a lot of schools. It's used out of schools, but it's used in a lot of schools. And I think there's a lot of issues with that. There's a lot of things that haven't been worked out yet on a policy level. So I think that's going to be one of the things that our legislatures are going to have to grapple with, is what are students' rights, and when it comes to their images being taken and analyzed within school buildings and on school campuses. And I don't know that that's really been hashed out yet.
Do you think that also includes like videos and recordings? Because capturing learning with videos is really big right now. You've got a lot of different, either students doing a screencast, or them making a Flipgrid, or doing something in Seesaw. They're capturing their likeness, their voice.
Sure. And I think all of those are subsumed under the Seesaw or Flipgrid or Screencastify or WeVideo or whatever system that they're using. Those apps cover that. The bigger question I think that's coming up that has yet to be resolved is when a kid's walking down the hallway and a surveillance camera is taking their picture, and then some administrator is taking an action based on, we reckon this camera algorithm said this was you in this particular spot. That's still, I think, unclear at this point.
That makes more sense.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I think our big question for the people watching is, what steps or changes can you take to make sure that your students are safe? Is there anything that threw a red flag for you while you were listening today? I know for me, a big one was the switch to, you know, not posting things by just not posting things at all. You gave the example earlier of the grades. And sometimes you just have to change your process. Well, if we don't, I was just thinking earlier this year, um, when my kids are still in elementary school, they posted all the kids' names, first name, last name, teacher name on a list outside of the front of the school. So anybody could come up and see. I mean, obviously it was, we assume, all parents, but and then people were coming up and taking pictures of those papers with all their kids in it. During the pandemic, one of the teachers of my children, and you know, I don't, she did not do this with malicious intent, and I know that, but she sent an email to all parents with a list of all the students' names, usernames, and passwords for their logins. Yeah. And when I brought it up as like a, hey, like this isn't okay, the reaction I got back was, they're third graders, like give me a break. And that was frustrating for me as a parent, knowing that it's not that I was worried about my daughter's data. It was that if the practice is that lenient here, where else are we making those mistakes? Where else are we not being safe? Where else are we not, you know, following the rules and stuff? Because those things compound.
Yep, absolutely.
And gets more and more. I know I have so many more questions, but I think it could go into a rabbit hole of like other things. So I don't want to get too crazy off topic. What is one or two pieces of advice that you would give to the teachers that work in your district? Like if you could just think of like one or two things, like make sure you're not doing this and keep this in mind. I know the privacy policy was one of them. I think that's super helpful.
Yeah, I think that's, if I could wave a magic wand and make everybody do something, I think that would be one of the first, is to make sure that when you're using some kind of website with your class, with your kids, that you are thoroughly vetting it and taking a look at the privacy policy, the terms of service. Is this legit? And if you have questions about that, there's someone in your school district or your school that is happy to help with that and would really like you to ask, rather than risk some kind of bad event happening, some kind of release, some kind of, you know, kid exposed to something they shouldn't be. That's, you know, that's something that we do, that I do in technology services, and so it's fine to be asked for that. I really appreciate that. So I think that's one real big thing to be aware of, is when you're choosing something, really be careful about the terms of service and the privacy policy.
Awesome. Anything else that you would add to that?
I think when we model good things for kids, you started off by talking about the teacher who was plagiarizing online and then got upset at their kids plagiarizing. When we model good practices for kids, it just multiplies the words that we say, right? We can tell kids all day long not to plagiarize, use good practices, be smart, use good judgment. When we do it ourselves, it multiplies that. So I think that's a real important piece there, is because we all know the teacher down the hall who's like, oh yeah, I just took all these PowerPoints from some website and here we are, and don't post them anywhere. I'm like, oh, okay, fine. So I think when we model for our kids what we want them to do, that really helps.
Yeah. And I think calling it out or explaining why we do it this way, or calling attention to that, I think all of those things are important. And it doesn't mean that you're going to be perfect at that every time. You really just wanted to use that image, and it's probably not Creative Commons licensed. So, but those types of things, I think, again, they build, right? They offer layers, and when we cut corners or we don't pay attention, or we just use it anyways, it could get you in trouble, which nobody wants that.
We could do a whole other session on copyright and what you can and can't do.
Maybe that should.
I've done workshops
Yeah.
in this district for that. So yeah,
We should absolutely do that, because I think a lot of teachers would benefit from knowing. And maybe it's willful, and saying this with the sweetest intentions. It could be willful ignorance. They don't want to know that they're doing it wrong, because then they have to do something different. And I've been there. I have absolutely been there. There are certain things that I don't want to do in my house, and so I just don't learn. So I don't have to do them, and that's fine. That's my husband's job.
right.
But yeah, I think when you're talking about things like this with student privacy, when you're talking about modeling good behavior, making digital, you cannot make a digital citizen if you're not modeling that to your students, just like you can't show good emotional intelligence if you yourself are not modeling emotional intelligence, or modeling appropriate behavior, right? All of that comes, monkey see, monkey do. The kids are going to see it, they're going to do it, whether it's conscious or unconscious, right? So awesome. And next week, we are really getting into the classroom and talking with some teachers about what it looks like for them and their grade levels, because, all of this information is wonderful, but what does it look like when I have 36 kids in my class, and we need to get them all logged in, and I need them, to know their password. And so things like that. How do you handle mess ups in the classroom? How do you handle, violations against your class code and all of that fun stuff? And then how do you teach it as an everyday conversation, and not just that dreaded, once a month lesson that the district's asking you to check a box? We definitely don't want digital citizenship and that digital culture to be a once a month checkbox for you guys. So any questions before we wrap up? Thank you guys so much for being here. We're going to send an email recording to everybody. And if you think of any questions after the fact, you're welcome to respond back to that email, and we'll get back to you for that. And Kevin, thank you so much for joining me. It's always a pleasure to spend some time with you and to chat about these things. And we will definitely have to do another webinar on copyright. I think that would be really interesting. And I think we would get a lot of questions about how teachers can do that better. So thank you guys so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.